Hey, family, this is my opportunity again. You know who I am. This is me, Bishop John Selders, and want to welcome you again to our platform and our conversation. Listen, we take the opportunity and godly proud and pleased that through technology that we are able to join you wherever you are in the world, and be in conversation with folk. Can I just say folk I like? Folk who I think are interesting, folk who I think have something to say, folk who have they are on the front line. Sometimes folk who are out there doing what it is that they do, and I think we ought to be in conversation with them. And tonight is no different. I want to say I met this young lady a number of years ago, and we have been in and around each other for a good deal of the time that I've been here in Connecticut. Um, I met her as she was doing the work of fighting for justice and truth telling, and just recently released a book that I want to chop it up with her a bit about. Um, uh, she has um, been a tireless worker for justice and for truth and truth telling. She worked for the state of Connecticut in the judiciary branch and retired from that. Um, I have been in her company as she has delivered the work of justice through the Connecticut Racial Justice Profiling Prohibition Project. She's a tireless worker and a stalwart with the NAACP in her area in Connecticut. Listen, this is a church-going woman, and in fact, have had the pleasure at her invitation to be in her congregation and to share there in Groton, Connecticut. Listen, I want to bring to our platform and to introduce you to, for those of you who don't know, Sister Tamara Lanier. Come on and greet the people, Tammy, Sister Tammy.
Good evening, good evening. And Bishop, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share your platform with me, to give me an opportunity to share my struggle and to share my story. So I am grateful and I am honored, and thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. You let me say to you publicly what I said to you privately. Um, this struggle I've watched from a distance, probably from the beginning, or at least the earliest part of your beginning to discover it. You were talking about it and mentioned it. I guess it was near the beginning, and
Mhm.
it was for me to to read this. I couldn't put this book down, once I got it, as I told you, I pre-ordered it, and somehow or another that got messed up, and so I had to go get this. I had to get this book, and I couldn't put it down. And within a day or two, I had gotten through it. Let me just show folk the book itself. Here it is. It's called From the Roots, and it is our sister Tammy's journey and her fight with Harvard University to reclaim her family's legacy. And she's going to do a little bit of talking about what this has meant and where this began. But let me just say, you are a shero to us. Your work has certainly brought inspiration to me, and I believe will continue as people read and discover who your Papa Renti was and is. It will be for us the same. Your story is many of our stories, and so let's start from the beginning, Sister Tam. Let's start from the beginning. Tell us your first discovery of your ancestor, your Papa Renti.
Wow. Well, if I start from the beginning, I have to start with my mother, and that was Mattie Pearl Thompson Lanier, who was the daughter of sharecropper parents. She was born and raised in a small rural community called Mount Meigs, Montgomery, Alabama. And like I said, she grew up the child of sharecropper parents, but she also grew up with an extended family where her grandfather lived with her, and she was raised by, her extended family. My mother's grandfather was born a slave. He lived many years as a slave. And he, in turn, shared with my mother so many stories about that experience. But not only that, but about her ancestors. And the story would always begin with the man who they all fondly referred to as Papa Renti, that he was a proud Black African, that he was an educator, that he learned to read. He taught himself to read using West Hartford's Noah Webster's Blueback Speller, and that he did this at a time when if it was known that he was literate or that he was teaching others to read, he could have been killed. So they were so proud of this man and his legacy, his history, who he was, how he was revered and respected. And every generation of his children were taught and told about Papa Renti and told never forget. And so this is the legacy that was passed down to my mother by her enslaved grandfather. And this is a story that was real for her, and she made it real for her children and her grandchildren. And and the my earliest memories were of my mom telling us these stories about Papa Renti. And as she got older and when her health began to fail, she started to say to me, I want you to write this down. I want you to put a family tree together, starting with Papa Renti. And I would, of course, I would go along with that. But we were talking 2010 at the time when genealogy was not the thing that it is today, and access to information and the internet was very different then than it is today. So I didn't know how to do it, and I promised her I would do it. And this stayed with her as her health continued to fail, and in the last days of her life, one of the things that she would say to me is, I want you to write this down. And I promised her I would. So this book that I've just recently published is about promises made and promises kept. I promised my my dying mother, that I would write down the story of our enslaved ancestor, Papa Renti, and document the oral history. And so at her passing, I set out to do that. And this book, and I hope it shines through in the book, how, and I talk about God putting people in my path and information at my fingertips, and just that this is a this is a purpose driven story with God's intervention throughout my journey, opening doors for me and making things happen. And the first incident of that is I was out walking one afternoon, and I was just, really, really laboring over the fact that I had promised my mother, and that she had went to her grave knowing and trusting that this work would be done. I had to figure out how to make that happen. And I happened to stop in this local ice cream shop and pick up a salad for lunch. And for whatever reason that afternoon, God put it on my heart to bare my soul to this ice cream shop owner. And, I started sharing with him that, my mom had passed, and I had promised that I would do this genealogy project, and I don't know how to do it. And he happened to say, I love to do this research. He said, write down what you know, and I will, start on the research. And this was a man who was in his late 70s at the time, and just surprised me because I didn't really think of him as an internet, whiz or a genealogist. But I was grateful for his willingness to help. So I did write down the information that I knew. I told him about Papa Renti was African born. And I gave him some of the names of the ancestors that I could recall. And I left the shop, and I didn't go right back for a couple of weeks. But when I did, when I walked in the door, he threw his hands up and he says, where have you been? I found your Papa Renti on the internet. And I remember thinking, what in the world is my enslaved ancestor doing on the internet? And at that point, we just exchanged information. I gave him my email address, and he gave me his, and he sent me a document. And I didn't look at it. I went back to work. I went home that evening. I did everything I needed to do. And it wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that I decided that I was going to take a look at what Rich had sent me. And so that evening, I sat down at my desk and I opened up that attachment. And the first thing I read is about this Harvard scientist by the name of Louis Agassiz, who commissioned a photographer named J.T. Zealy of Columbia, South Carolina, to capture nude images of my enslaved ancestors, Rinty and Delia, as well as there were 7 in total, as well as 5 other people, to take nude images of these enslaved people to show the stark differences within the race. And these images were sexually suggestive, particularly for the men. And they can be found on the internet if you care to see, but some of the most inhumane and violent images you would want to see. And he did this to prove that blacks were subhuman, that they weren't of the same blood as white people were, and thusly should continue to be enslaved. And so he used these images to create a propaganda to really poison the minds of people who were at that point, and this was done in 1850, I should say, at a point when this country was divided on the question of slavery. And this was done supposedly to show that blacks were, as the scientist put it, um, he described black people as having the intellectual capacity of a 7-month old fetus in the womb of its mother. And basically, this propaganda was used to promote and prolong slavery. And so the irony of this, and of course, Rich sent this to me in the documents, and I'm reading this. And at the point when I'm reading it, I don't yet know that my enslaved ancestors were used as a part of that study. But when I finished reading about this ugly scientific racism to scientifically prove Black inferiority and white supremacy, I click on to the next image, which was an image of my Papa Renti. When I opened that document and his image filled the screen, I knew immediately that that was the man that I had heard so many stories about throughout my life. And I knew that because I can see in his eyes and in his face so much of my family, so much of my ancestors, my relatives. Um, it was a surreal moment, and very hard to describe that moment because beyond what I saw that was familiar, I saw a defiant look, a look of frustration, a look that I felt was like demanding my attention and like communicating with me in a way that I could not turn away from. And so there is something, if you haven't seen the image of my Papa Renti, or Congo Renti as he's called, you have to experience it because, again, the expression on his face and the way his eyes capture your attention, not only your attention, but your imagination, is something that it's difficult to describe. You just have to experience it and you just have to see this image. But the defiance that was on his face, the expressions that, I drew from that image just really, you know, held me mesmerized for at least 10 to 15 minutes where I couldn't turn away. I couldn't look at anything but those images. And I called my girls to come and see also because for their entire life they had heard the stories about who this man was. And when I then made a connection between the scientific racism and the race experiment that this man, this Harvard scientist, used my enslaved ancestors to promote their own inferiority, I was shocked in a way that it's very hard to describe because, again, my oral history was that this man was an educator, that this man was self taught, that this man got a hold of Noah Webster's Blueback Speller and taught himself and others to read. So I'm like, hold on a minute, Harvard. You got the wrong guy here because you cannot say that this is an image of Black inferiority because this man was an example of Black excellence. And I say that because I traveled to West Hartford and got a copy of Noah Webster's Blueback Speller. And I have it to this day. And I looked through it, I've read through it. And the one thing that I can tell you is that I could not have taught myself to read by myself if I didn't know how to read by using that book. And so, for our enslaved ancestors who were self taught and who taught themselves to read with this book, that's a feat that I think, we don't give them enough credit for because beyond the fact that they didn't have instructors or teachers or classrooms, they were stealing away to do this work and to learn to read. And it's I found it impossible for me to take that book and, if I didn't know how to read, to teach myself to read, but our ancestors did. And the other thing that my research and the work that I've done has shown me, that growing up in history classes, we were taught that slaves didn't learn how to read and they were illiterate. I'm finding in my own family history and as well as for other enslaved people, it wasn't that they were illiterate, it was just that they were not vocal about their ability to read because they could be killed. And so we're taught historically that our ancestors were illiterate, but that is their story. It's not our story. And I often I find that it's important to share that the literacy and the ability for our enslaved ancestors to read was so underreported and neglected. It's not our true story.
Well, hang on. You said just so much. So thank you just for that beginning introduction into how you found out about your Papa Renti and through your mother, and the
Mhm.
storytelling that she did with you, and that in fact the oral histories that come to many of us
Mm.
through our mamas and daddies and our
Mhm.
big mamas
Big mammy.
and big
Mhm.
daddy
Mhm.
and our people. I was fascinated that one, he learned to read, so there's a Connecticut connection for you.
Mhm.
Now we're talking about South Carolina, right? so
Yes.
so 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 Papa Renti and your family have roots in South Carolina and then the Alabama and Mississippi, in fact.
Yes,
And you
and
you
and
tell
and
us.
you yes, and this is something again, and this has been such a journey and a retelling and a relearning of history, and not only U.S. history but my own personal history because I knew my family in Alabama. I didn't know much about South Carolina, but that's our origin story. That's where it all began. And what happened is these enslavers it was such a business. Even they would marry their children into large slaveholding families to extend their dynasty, and these dynasties would extend throughout the South. South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and they just you know traveled the South, extending their slave ownership and their dynasty throughout the South. And so as these families moved and dispersed, they broke up the families and took them along with them. And in my case, Benjamin Franklin Taylor had many brothers and sisters, and they all traveled throughout the South. But as they traveled, they broke up enslaved families. And, so I had family South Carolina, some in Alabama, some in Mississippi, some in Louisiana. And I'm just piecing that together now. And but my oral history, the story that my mom told, that was told to her by her grandfather, is that he and his mother Tina, and she spelt her name Tena, and it was actually Tenna, but her name was Tina. She was called Tina. They were separated from their family and sold south. But it wasn't necessarily a property sales a sale. When Benjamin Franklin Taylor, the slaveholder, died, he gifted my great great grandmother, and her children, and her increase, as he put it, to his children. And they were in Charleston. So my great great grandmother and my great grandfather were forced to leave Columbia and go to Charleston with the slaveholder's daughter as a gift. And the one thing that in doing this work and doing the genealogical research, what you come to understand is the devaluing of Black life and how they were marginalized and trivialized. Even going through the slave indexes, I had the slaveholder's will, and in his will, he had a slave index. And I'll never forget the first time reading through, I was sitting at actually, I was laying in my bed reading through this, and I'm following my ancestors going down the line, and then I run into a line where it's my enslaved ancestors, then there's cows and pigs and farm equipment, and then more ancestors, but my ancestors were mixed in with the other livestock. And I remember thinking in that moment when I was reading it, just lamenting for my ancestors who wondering if they understood how marginalized and trivialized they were to be reduced to livestock and what that must have meant and felt like for them.
Yeah,
And yeah.
yeah. See, a, a, a couple of things that I want to have you speak about a little bit that I would have, and in follow up conversations, maybe you'll get to write some more about this,
Mhm.
to share about your own personal feeling. You talk about, for example, making that connection between human beings
Mm.
and livestock and other property,
Mhm.
that somehow our humanity in this the enslavement period
Mhm.
was reduced for the purposes of doing this, and that your Papa Renti's image, and I want to talk a little bit about that. First off,
Mm.
you what was discovered were images that were taken from the earliest of photography. Right,
Exactly.
there was a process where actually photos were taken on like mirror like plates.
Exactly.
That process is called what?
Daguerreotypes. And
Daguerreotypes, right?
that's the early imagery, the photography in the early 1800s. These were the first photos, or historically, now this is history saying it, not me. The first identifiable photos of enslaved people captured using this process of the daguerreotypes to take pictures to capture
So
image.
that's right. So the inventor of that was a guy by the name of Louis Daguerre,
Yes.
and he created this process. So by the 1940s, I'm sorry, the 1840s and 1850s,
Hmm.
this was the way photos were made. Now let's pause here just for a moment. One, your ancestors
Hmm.
were two of seven
Hmm.
of pictures that were taken of the very first
Yes.
enslaved people taken
Hmm.
that we know of. Now,
Yes.
secondly, that those pictures are so stunning, so sharp. One of the way the process of the picture making was done, in that it created photos that were actually very, very well done and very well, what we're told is that the details are stunning.
It
So
is.
so that you were able to, and I love your description of just sitting with seeing yourself in your
Mm.
paparenti,
Yes.
right? and
Hmm.
and each of us, many of us, when there are pictures of our ancestors, pictures of our grandpas and
Hmm.
grandmas and great
Hmm.
you look for those physical features, and
You
of
know
course
your people when you
you
see them.
do.
Hmm.
Let me tell you a quick story. We were in we were blessed to take a small delegation from our church to West Africa.
Hmm.
We were on Gorée Island in Senegal. We were
Hmm.
in a we were about to enter into and be given a tour of the grounds, the slave mansion, as
Mm.
they called it, on Gorée Island. This is the place where the door of no return. There were a number of these
Mm.
doors of no return. So we were
Hmm.
across the street in this museum. There was a guy came up to me, and he was speaking, in some language that I didn't understand. I was, I was feeling a type of way, because here we are
Hmm.
on Gorée Island. We about to enter into this place. As every African American, you want to feel something. You want to have some kind of connection to
Hmm.
your ancestry and to the
Hmm.
spirits of your ancestors. And
Hmm.
so I was not feeling getting sold a product or getting hustled.
Hmm.
And he walked up to me and began to speak in his language, saying, "Hey, you he was saying whatever he was
Hmm.
saying," and I was like, "Dude, this ain't the time to be messing with me." He said, "No, no," and he was talking again, and he said, "Come, come, come," and he walked me over in this museum to these profiles
Mm.
of the major tribes in Senegal and in the region of West Africa. They're like they're 9 or 10. And Africans can tell other Africans where they're from. They see physical features and they recognize who they are. Would it not be the case that that man brought me over to a group of profiles and then pictures of people that look like my people here in the United States, as opposed to others who didn't look like my folk, right? I looked like what he was showing me to discover later vis-a-vis some of the DNA and now the technologies that you referenced earlier, that I do have some ancestry in West Africa and possibly in that very region and that tribe and groups of tribes that they were talking about. I don't have, and if I were to explain to you, and I can't, but I could tell you how I felt, that every time I went to New Orleans, my blood boiled. I had a sense that I know this place. When people speak French to me, it's as if I don't speak French. I parlez-vous français, and I mispronounce that, and I got a few more words, and that's it. But when I hear French, it's familiar to me. I can't tell you why. I couldn't tell you why for many, many years, only to discover that not only my maternal ancestry is from about 100 miles from the Gulf. My paternal people, my father's people, biologically, are from a place called East Feliciana Parish in Louisiana, in north and west of New Orleans. There are whole lots of Selders that I don't know. I didn't know until I got to begin to know them, and I actually had the wonderful privilege of meeting my grandfather's last surviving sister.
Wow.
She was my grandfather was the oldest of 13 or 12 children, 12 children. He was the oldest of 12. And I got to talk to his baby sister. She didn't know my grandfather, but she always talked about her daddy said he had 2 sons that went off to war. He was talking about World War I. Went off to war, who never returned, but that here's what their names were. And for me to be talking to her, to be talking to my grandfather, who I never met in the flesh, I only met him in the spirit, if you will, is just I would say it changes you in some way. The encounter of who you are and who you're from.
Yes.
Once you know, and you know that feeling, you didn't have any evidence. That's right.
Exactly.
And it's just, and it's like an empathic feeling. And I can tell you, I have been in spaces where I have felt my ancestors' presence. And it's hard to describe. It makes no sense, but it is real. And I just say this, you know, in doing this work, in piecing our broken families back together again, I describe it as an adoptive child trying to find their family. And the experience for descendants of American chattel slavery to do their genealogical trees, to piece their families back together, is very different from the white experience. And I say that because, you know, some people do this work out of curiosity, wanting to learn and find. But for the Black experience is so different because, you know, it's trying to piece back something together that was so violently detached. It's such a raw and emotional process of doing this work. It's not like out of, you know, curiosity or, like a hobby. Some people do this. It's painful work, and there's a lot of trauma associated with it.
It absolutely is. So this story, you got to get the book to get all the details. And
Mhm.
and you didn't get here, Sister Tammy, by yourself. There were lots of players, and can I use this? Y'all don't get mad at me
Mhm.
because I'm a faith person, and I
Mhm.
know you are a faith person.
Yeah.
God was all in this. You bumped into people
Ooh,
and got
God
emails from
opened
people.
doors for me. God put people in my path. And I'm telling you, the meek shall inherit the earth. I'm telling you, I, 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 I found the one, and there's so many examples. There's a chapter called Praying for a Breakthrough, and you see me, and I think the image is included in the book, where I'm standing over a casket at the state capitol. There was an event to commemorate, to bury, to finally lay to rest an enslaved man named Mr. Fortune, who was enslaved in Waterbury, Connecticut, where a doctor at Mr. Fortune's death, who owned him, boiled the skin from his skeleton and preserved his skeleton, and then later gifted that skeleton to a museum. And when the students went to visit the museum, these are young kids who saw this and were shocked to know the story, and started a letter campaign petitioning that museum to give that man the dignity of a final resting place and a proper burial. And they ultimately did bury him. And when I heard that story, it was so much like my own. And I said I had to go. And when I went there, I went to the event at the Capitol. And I, at this point, had been in conversation with Harvard, telling them who my Papa Rinty was, and asking them to tell the truth about who this enslaved man was, and stop with this narrative that they had tried to create, trying to create a story for these people. Tell this man's true legacy. And they dismissed it. When the news reporters would reach out to Harvard, they would say there's no way that she can prove that this man is her ancestor. There's no way that she can prove that our renting, their renting is my renting. And they discourage people from writing the story. So I was having trouble getting people to tell my story.
So hang on just for a second. Let's talk about this just for a moment.
Mhm.
The pictures of your ancestors were in the possession of initially of a professor
Mhm.
who wanted to tell this story of what I call crack science,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
Right, is
Mhm.
quackery, right?
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
somehow or another that white folk are somehow inherently smarter, wiser, stronger, blah blah blah,
Mhm.
and that black folk aren't.
Mhm.
In the face of the oldest bones that are ever found, the oldest remains are
Mhm.
found in Africa. In the
Mhm.
face of the oldest civilizations are from Africa. In the
Mhm.
face of all of what is natural, true, and factual, we
Mhm.
create mythologies and
Mhm.
this what I call pseudoscience
Mhm.
of the 19th century, right?
Mhm.
That gets repeated and dug down deep, and so the professor who was brought from Europe here
Mhm.
to the United States gets a prestigious post at Harvard,
Mhm.
and then is commissioned to do this crackery science where he then commissions the photographer down in South Carolina to take pictures
Mhm. Mhm.
of your folk. And then over the course of the histories and times, those pictures are buried in the
Yeah.
Peabody Museum at Harvard,
Yes, they
right?
are. Mhm.
They're buried and almost forgotten.
Mhm.
And a worker at that museum discovers them
Mhm.
along with a couple of staff people, but they discovered these pictures, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
began to ask questions of where did they come from, how did they get to it, blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
And that woman is thwarted, and she dies.
Mhm. Mhm.
You didn't get in touch with, or you
And
were
you know,
put in touch
she
with.
she the story, the work she did to piece the story together. Harvard
Right.
didn't do that work. It was
Right.
her
This
on
was
her
hers.
own dime and her
Mm-hmm.
own time going to South Carolina, piecing this because she was so moved by what she saw in that image. And she
And,
puts the story together, and Harvard gets rid of her. They make it so adversarial for her to work there. She leaves, but then they run with the story that she put together, telling
listen,
it like it's their own, like they did the
yeah,
work.
right, right. And then they got other people who write books about the stuff, who write about this stuff,
Mm,
and they put their own spin on it. Right. Every time
exactly.
they're one of these scholars allegedly
Hmm.
put their own spin on the story and never get the story
Hmm.
from the people whose pictures they are. I love the fact that in this love but hate at the
Hmm.
same time, and quite disturbed by the argument of the folk representing Harvard
Hmm.
who say the I, I don't know about you, but I've been abroad and people take pictures of me
Hmm.
and they don't ask. They just
Hmm.
take pictures of me. In part, I think because they don't see often enough somebody
Yes.
they can
That.
see
Hmm.
that's somehow or another I'm some kind of I'm exotic or I'm
Mm.
unique. I got a
Hmm.
lot of hair, whatever, and they take pictures. Then they don't ask. And
Hmm.
no, you can't take my image and use it and steal it.
Mm.
Oh, and yet the argument used by the people representing Harvard is these images are ours.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
own them.
Yeah.
And so the images that you initially saw were in the Peabody Museum, owned
Hmm.
by Harvard University.
Hmm. Exactly.
All right,
And
so, go ahead.
they go to great pains to not only lord over these images, but they're also using them for profit and making money off these images. I did a documentary, it's called Free Renting. And the director of that film, years previously, mentioned that he had paid Harvard, I think it was 750 or something, some reasonably large amount, for a one-time usage fee of the image. And they will tell you, and they have tried to sue, they have threatened to sue people who use the image outside of what you agree to. And so they're not only controlling the narrative, but they're also pocketing money. Everything from 1850 to where I sit today was about money. When Harvard commissioned these daguerreotypes in 1850, it was because of cotton. In my complaint, my attorney said it best when he quoted the quote, "Cotton was the thread that held the Union together, because the North," again, this isn't taught, but this is the reality. People up north were making more money off cotton than they were in the South. And the Industrial Revolution, and particularly in Massachusetts, where all of the Harvard leadership was heavily invested in the Industrial Revolution and cotton. And they needed slavery to persist.
Yes, you make the case. You raise the specter of complicity. The book that was put together by journalists and who edited the
Mhm.
articles that were published by the Hartford Courant about
Mhm.
those who were invested in the insurance executives and
Mhm.
companies that were invested, banks that were
Yep.
all making plenty of money on the enslavement
Mhm.
of human cargo from Africa. It
Easy
is a
money,
that's
making
it,
easy money up here in the
and it
north.
is that money that seeded the
Mhm.
Industrial Revolution. And you
Ex-
make that case so very beautifully in
mhm.
telling your own story. Now, and listen, folks, y'all got to get the book. Y'all got to read it for yourself. There's a whole lot of details in here, and we
Mhm.
can't tease out all the details. Here's what ultimately occurs, and I want you, Sister Tammy, to pick up here. you end up after dozens and dozens of attempts to talk to, you talk to one president of Harvard, you talk to another president, you tried to reach out to faculty. Most of them didn't pay you no mind. I mean, some of the celebrity ones, I'm gonna say less right there. I'm gonna say less right there. But some of the ones that y'all like to quote, no, they wouldn't. They didn't respond to you. Didn't reach back for you. You ultimately had to lawyer up. Now, of course, you who you gonna call? These days we gonna call Ben Crump. That's who we gonna call. And of course you did. You partnered with attorney Ben Crump, and a firms here locally and regionally.
And God's hands were all up in that, because I was at a conference. There were hundreds and hundreds of people at this conference. I'm way back in the back, could hardly see, but I could hear Ben Crump talking. And I'm thinking, because everybody is intimidated by Harvard. Harvard's influence is far reaching. Their money just shuts people up, shuts things down. And nobody wanted to talk about challenging Harvard. And so I happened to hear Ben Crump talking, and I'm thinking, he's somebody who might not be afraid to challenge Harvard University. I had a picture, a business card with Papa Rinty's image on it. And I'm way back in the back, and he's wrapping up. So I start as he's wrapping up, trying to make my way to the stage and to make my way to the front. And I'm pressing through, and I'm squeezing through, and I'm sliding, and I'm getting closer. And they're up there taking selfies, and I'm still weaving through the crowd trying to get to them. And God made a way for me, okay? Because I made it to that stage from the back. And everybody's surrounding him, and his people are trying to pull him off to get him to leave, and people are still trying to take pictures and selfies. And I make it to him, and I pull out this picture, and I say, "Have you seen this image? This is an image of my Papa Rinty." And I didn't know what I was going to say, but I just started talking, and I said, "This is about reparations. This is about reclaiming my ancestors' plundered property." And I'm just babbling, trying to say something that would capture his attention, but it was the card and Rinty's stare and his image that he said just stayed with him. And we exchanged business cards. I gave him my information, which had Papa Rinty's image on the front, and he gave me his. And a few days later, he said he hadn't been able to think about, he called me and he says, "I haven't been able to think about anything else." He said, "This is about reparations." And I said, "It certainly is."
Listen, let's be very clear, folks. Harvard University is the oldest school here in North America, in a Western context. All right. And it is the wealthiest, and maybe even one of the wealthiest, as far as coin is concerned, bag, y'all want to call it, in the world. They got money. And so here is property allegedly of theirs that really is your ancestors' property. So in fact, it's you and your family's property. Right, at least in the case of your two ancestors, and at least a conversation needs to be had about how we talk. Because I like what you said in the book. Listen, you wasn't looking to, you just wanted to know what y'all doing with this stuff. That was your initial question.
Him humbly. So,
you wasn't coming to get the bag.
No. But then they forced me to say, "Give me my ancestors' property back," because the way they dismissed me, the way they continue to perpetrate the lie, the false narrative as to who this man was. And they were doing it all because in the time that I showed up on the scene, they were in the process of producing this big book about my enslaved ancestors. They had commissioned people from all over the world some people in Europe, some historians here, one here at UConn, and all of these people to come together to create a narrative as to who these enslaved people were. And
Mhm.
I was offering them that, and they wanted me to go away because
Mhm.
I was going to mess up their book. And so they couldn't acknowledge me. They would never, in all the years I've approached him, to say, just look at the research. Here's the direct line from this man to me.
Mhm.
Just sit down and look at it. Tell me what you think. Henry Gates, Mr. Who do you think you are? Just look
Mhm.
and tell me what you think. They would
Listen,
never look at it.
and your book really follows your trail
Mhm.
of the people that crossed your path, of the enslaver's family.
Mhm.
You got an invitation to be in the home of one of your ancestors. Had was the carpenter
Mhm.
that
Uh,
made the table and the chairs you were sitting on.
I
What?
could have fell off the chair. I cannot describe. There are words that cannot describe when he uttered that. Because I had read that slave index in that will so many times, I knew it verbatim. And so when the slaveholder's great grandson invited me to go to his house, my kids thought I was crazy, but I knew I needed information that only he had, that I had to have to finish piecing this story together. I had to go. And so when I got the invitation, I accepted. I said, I will be on the next thing smoking. I'm going. And so I go to South Carolina, to Columbia, South Carolina, to meet with the slaveholder's great grandson, who sits at a table. He said, first he says, you're eating from the dishes of the enslaver, Benjamin Franklin Taylor. But he said, you're eating from Benjamin Franklin Taylor's dishes. And when he said you were sitting at the table and chair that was hand carved by the family carpenter, my mind immediately went to, wait, hold on. Prince Thompson is identified in the slave index as the family carpenter. That's my ancestor. My ancestor carved this table and chair and all the woodwork in the room. And I was just stuck in that moment. He kept talking, and honestly, I couldn't tell you what he was saying because all I was thinking is these pieces are over almost 200 years old. And just the detail in the woodwork and just the mastery of the carpentry. And I was just blown away.
Yeah. See, these are the parts of this story. I mean, and at every turn, what I've appreciated about you, one, is to know you and to know a bit of my own family story, to know what this it sits in
Mm,
your soul. There's
mhm,
something that's kinetic and psychic and spiritual,
mhm,
related to being in South Carolina, driving on the land.
mm. Sacred
That,
space. That
oh
was
my God,
sacred space for me.
oh my God, it just so I gotta fast forward, real quick. We
Mhm.
we get to the point you end up getting into litigation. You got
Yes,
to sue just to
yes.
have a conversation. They done
Mhm,
lied.
mm.
They come up with things, and at least the first iteration of the litigation, you don't win.
No, no. And it makes no sense to me, even to this moment. Our argument was simple. When you commissioned these daguerreotypes in 1850, that was an illegal act because the state of Massachusetts had abolished slavery. So these daguerreotypes are plunder.
Right.
They are.
I'm sorry. And you talk about Monbeth
Mm,
and her liberty
mm,
and the Massachusetts rendering slavery illegal, and
mm.
Monbeth, who's right up the way here in Massachusetts,
There you. Mhm.
in the Berkshires. So it's great story.
It
You do
is.
lots of historical research work. I'm sorry. Continue.
And
So
so this is the fruit of the poisonous tree. These daguerreotypes are the proceeds of a crime. And never in the history of jurisprudence do you see a court give a criminal back that they illegally acquired. You always give things back to the victim, and you make the victim whole, not the criminal or not the wrongdoer. So it made no sense in terms of how a case, or just in the history of jurisprudence, you never see the wrongdoer rewarded with the fruit of their crime. It just doesn't happen. And so Harvard's argument was very basic, and I thought made no sense, where they said that irregardless of the violence that was a, was used to acquire the image, irregardless of whether it's pornography or whatever, the photo always belongs to the photographer, and that's settled law. I knew better. I worked 27 years in the judicial branch. I have worked on restitution cases. I have worked on child pornography cases where the court wants to know from the victim, what are your interests? How would you like to see this? The victims have rights, okay? And so, it made no sense to me that someone who kidnaps someone, who forces them to disrobe and take nude pictures of them, can say, I own this, even though I got this in the commission of a crime. It just didn't make any sense. The initial judge said, Harvard, you're right. He sided with Harvard.
yeah, and then you all didn't give up.
No.
Your legal team did not give up, and ultimately this ascends right to the
Mhm.
Massachusetts Supreme Court,
Yes.
and ultimately you get a verdict in this case. Now, one of the sidebars, and you can't stay here. We can't
Mhm.
stay here. But one of the sidebars is in the first uh, case when you heard about it from a journalist.
Yes. Yes.
That's some
I got,
crazy. You
yeah.
got you didn't hear about it. You heard it from somewhere else who's calling you for reactions.
A foreign journalist in another country called me, and I was out walking, and I looked, my phone is ringing, some weird number. It says France. I answer it. It's a former Harvard student who's a journalist now in Europe, and he says, I'm calling you about the decision. What decision? And he had to text it to me for me to believe that the court had ruled. And I sent it to the attorneys who had received nothing. But
Wow.
I firmly believe that because he was tied with Harvard, or he was a Harvard student, he probably had some contact. Harvard got that message first. They got
Right,
that
right,
decision first and started
right,
sharing it, and that's what happened.
right. Well, you didn't quit, and ultimately tell us what happened. There was a
Ultimately, we appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, and it took them 8 months to rule. And that they did rule. They released a 91-page decision that was historic in many ways. Firstly, that 91-page decision chastises Harvard every which way possible. There is nothing good in that 91-page decision for Harvard except for one thing. The court allowed them to keep the daguerreotypes. But what they did do is Harvard had filed a motion to dismiss. And I like to frame this, one of the things that I'm most proud of about this case in the history of this country, countless reparations lawsuits have been filed. And every single one of them, as recent as the Tulsa lawsuit, have been dismissed from the door for either lack of standing or for whatever reason. They do not survive and continue to a judgment. So Harvard filed a motion to dismiss. The lower court upheld that and dismissed it. The Supreme Court of Massachusetts reversed that and said this case will proceed to a jury decision. It will, and not only will it proceed, but they enlarged my complaint to say you are going to go back and include in your complaint a claim for reckless, outrageous, and negligent infliction of emotional distress, not only for Rinty and Delia, my ancestors, but for me too. And so we didn't ask for that. The court said, we're enlarging this complaint to include that. So never before in the history of this country has a reparations complaint survived a motion to dismiss. But here the court is saying not only does it survive that motion to dismiss, but you're going to compensate Rinty, Delia, and me for the emotional distress that you've caused in 1850 and that you've caused me from 2010 to 2015, where we stand today.
So where is the case now? Where are you now?
We are still pending. We recently have had discovery and depositions. And, Harvard has filed this motion of confidentiality. They don't want me to talk about all of the stuff that is being said. I encourage people to go to the Massachusetts court case lookup and see some of the documents there, which have a lot of the details. But all I can say is in discovery, it reaffirmed for me what I knew was happening all along. And so it is still pending. The attorneys are talking for the first time. And we were supposed to go to trial in January, but there have been some delays that is pushed back now. But the one thing that I like to conclude with, and I'm claiming this in advance, Harvard will be the first American institution to pay reparations for the harm they've caused to enslaved victims and their descendants.
Amen to that.
Amen.
I am, like I said when we began about an hour ago, a little over an hour ago. You are my hero, Shiro.
Oh, thank you.
This is if ever we needed a story like this, if ever we need this story and in your story right now. Let me show it again. It is from these roots.
Yes. And I
Like
encourage
Tamara.
everybody, do the genealogical work. The information is accessible. It's not like you have to travel the archives like you would in the past to do this. Look
Mhm.
in your family trees, look in your family histories. Our people were amazing people who persevered, who accomplished much, and much was taken from us.
Mhm.
Our homes, our farms, our intellectual property, our cultural property. There
Mhm.
was so much plunder that
Mhm.
happened. And you don't know when you start to do this work what you might find in your family history. I didn't expect this. It just kind of all revealed itself. But I
Mhm.
encourage everybody to do that work. And if you have a big mama at home or a great grandma who knows this history, and I said, we are not what they write about us in these history books. We are the stories that our ancestors have told, and
Yes.
and this is who we are, and what they write about is who they want us to be. And this is again what the images, and I like to refer to them as the first example of racial profiling, because they were the first example of imagery. And what did they do when they took an image of a black man? They created a profile of who they wanted him to be, knowing that was not who they were.
That's right. That's right. I I am spiritually with you
Mm.
and literally supportive you and have been praying with you and for
Mm-hmm.
you, my beloved Pamela and I. In fact, early on when you did a presentation of some of your early work, she was
Mm-hmm.
in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and have watched from afar.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to know you, honored to know you, and
Mm.
for me, this story and the telling of this story brings to bear that David can conquer Goliath. And
Amen. Giants, they do fall, and
listen, they fall.
they fall, and you tell the truth, and you shame the devil. And this is,
listen, this is a absolutely must read for those of you that have any interest in how we do the work, how we do the fight. It's not for the faint of heart, and it may not come, lickety split, but over time, your persistence, your perseverance, and just when you say, "Oh, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," then God
opens a door for me.
And this story is a must read. You also have a film, a documentary that kind of chronicles some of this story as well.
And you can see it free on Tubi. It's on Tubi. It's free renting, and you can go on that free network and watch it.
All righty. Listen, sister, I appreciate you giving us some of your time to this evening. We'll come back again when there's some more movement and some more storytelling. I appreciate you spending time with us and allowing us a bit to claim your Papa Renty as our Papa Renty.
Amen.
And to journey with you as you have reclaimed not only your legacy, but you in some really deep way are reclaiming the humanity of our people. And this story and what the law has had to say.
And you just look at God's providence again and the timing. Now I'm telling this story at a time when they're trying to erase our history.
Yes.
And so, and people will see this and understand the totality of it and why it's so important to reclaim our stories and tell our stories.
Yes. Thank you so very much.
And I thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Folks, as you have listened and heard and hopefully gotten inspired by the telling of this tremendous story, one, go buy the book, get the book. It's a Pilgrim Random House publication, and it'll help Sister Tamara go buy some lunch or something other, as well as you will discover that the stories of our enslaved folk is not just a story of the southern part of this country. There's a northern story that also, and a direct connection that has to be told. Listen, wherever you see this, if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe to our channels, More Money CT or me, Bishop John Selders, and look, we'll be telling more of these kinds of stories, and we certainly hope, Sister Tammy, as there's movement, you come back and share with us
absolutely
what's coming, what has happened, and keep us updated. I appreciate you very much. Look, guys, we'll be at this again. I call it same bet channel, same bet time. Be on the look. We are here to share these stories and stories like these for the uplift of our folk and for our liberation. God bless everybody. We'll see you. Peace.
Good night.